remember the moment I stood in front of that luxury store like it was yesterday. The glossy windows reflected a life I once dreamed about, a life that felt as out of reach as the stars above. My hands were trembling, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't the store that had me feeling this way, it was the hoodie I held in my hands. That simple, branded hoodie was more than just fabric. It was a symbol, a reminder of everything I had fought against, everything I had to prove. I looked at the price tag once more, $1,000. The softest fabric, the most intricate stitching, the kind of clothing most people would never even dream of wearing. But here I was, holding it like it was nothing, ready to buy the whole damn store if I wanted to. Because I knew something my sister didn't, I was about to change everything. The irony of it wasn't lost on me. My sister had handed me that hoodie years ago, laughing with a $70 gift card as if that was some kind of prize. "Here's the hoodie and a $70 card," she had smirked, almost in pity. I'd been 23 at the time, a fresh college graduate, unsure of myself and terrified of the future. My sister had everything. She had the looks, the charm, and most importantly, the success. She was already the CEO of her own company, at the top of the ladder, while I was just trying to figure out how to pay rent. It was her way of rubbing it in. She always did that, handing me a piece of her world like I should be grateful, and at the time, I was grateful. I took that hoodie and the gift card and smiled, even though deep down I felt humiliated. I knew she didn't mean it the way she said it. She didn't think I'd ever amount to anything. The thought crossed my mind, but I buried it. I always buried it. But today was different. I wasn't standing here as the girl with a $70 card, trying to make sense of her life. I was standing here as someone who had built something for herself, a $6 million luxury brand that I owned. My brand, my vision. And the world, in its twisted little way, had come full circle. I couldn't help but think of the years I spent in her shadow. Every birthday party, every family dinner, there she was, the golden child, the one who always had the answers, always knew what to say. I, on the other hand, was the screw-up, the black sheep. My failures were always on display, while her successes were celebrated like royalty. My parents never saw it. I don't know if they chose to be blind to it or if they just didn't care. Maybe they were too busy basking in her achievements to notice how much it stung to be ignored. It's not like they were malicious, at least, not intentionally. But everything she did seemed so effortless, so perfect, while everything I did felt like an uphill battle. The pressure to succeed was suffocating, but it didn't matter. Nothing I did would ever be good enough for them, at least not in the way it was for her. I remember one particular family dinner when everything came to a head. We were sitting at the long, polished dining table, the smell of roasted lamb filling the room, the clink of fine silverware against porcelain plates. I just told my parents about an internship I'd landed at a fashion startup. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was a start. My sister, of course, already had her empire up and running by then. The moment I spoke, she looked at me with a mixture of amusement and something darker, something I couldn't quite name. "Well, I hope you don't let them take advantage of you," she'd said with that perfect, rehearsed smile. "You should make sure you're getting paid what you're worth. I wouldn't want them to exploit you." It wasn't a bad thing to say, not exactly. But the way she said it, like she was condescending to me, it was as if she was reminding me of my place. The golden child, the CEO, giving advice to the little sister who was still figuring things out. And then, just as casually, she handed me the hoodie. A simple, branded hoodie from her collection, the one she had designed with her team. She didn't even look at me when she tossed it onto my lap, along with a $70 card. It was a gift, but it wasn't really a gift. It was a symbol, a reminder of everything I was. "Here's the hoodie and the card," she said, smirking. I could tell she expected me to be grateful, but all I could feel was a deep, nauseating sense of humiliation. Was this her idea of generosity? A $70 card? What was that supposed to buy me? A sandwich. "Thanks," I said, forcing a smile. It was all I could do. My parents didn't seem to notice, or maybe they just didn't care. I'm sure they thought it was sweet of her. Sweet of her to give me something. But deep down, I knew that the hoodie wasn't just a gift, it was a way for her to remind me of my place. To make sure I understood who was the real winner. I wasn't her equal. I never would be, not in her eyes. I wore the hoodie once or twice, but each time it felt like a weight on my shoulders. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was a symbol of my own failure. The luxury brand she built, the empire she controlled, it was her world, not mine. And I was still stuck in the shadows, with my little $70 card, just trying to survive. But things change, people change. And today, as I stood in front of that store, I realized how far I'd come. I'd been through hell to get here, clawing my way up from nothing, proving everyone, including my sister, wrong. The brand I'd built wasn't just a luxury label. It was my statement to the world that I had something of my own, that I was worth something. I wasn't just the little sister with the $70 card anymore. I was the one in control. I was the one making the rules. And as I walked into that store, ready to buy it with the fruits of my labor, I couldn't help but smile. The world had a funny way of flipping things around. All those years of being told I wasn't good enough, that I'd never amount to anything, had led me to this moment. This was my moment of triumph. And my sister, she had no idea what was coming. The years leading up to this moment felt like one long, drawn-out game of hide and seek, only I was the one hiding, always running just a step behind. The shadows of my sister's success followed me everywhere, even when I tried my hardest to carve out my own identity. But no matter what I did, it always felt like I was chasing a ghost. I don't think she ever understood what it was like to be me, to be in her shadow, always expected to measure up, but never given the same opportunities. She was the golden child, the one who everyone praised for being the perfect example of success. I, on the other hand, was the one who was figuring things out, as my mom always liked to say. I remember the first time I tried to get serious about fashion. I was 17, and the whole world was at my feet. I had just finished my junior year of high school and was starting to think about college, about what I wanted to do with my life. Fashion had always been my passion, but it wasn't something I could just talk about with my family. My sister had made it clear that business was her territory, and she was making waves. She wasn't just a pretty face with a degree from an Ivy League school. She was out there running an actual business, creating something real. Her brand wasn't just a label. It was a statement, an empire. I didn't have the luxury of being able to walk into a meeting with investors or press. My dreams felt far off, almost laughable in comparison. But I couldn't let go of that feeling. The itch to create, to do something that would leave a mark on the world, was too strong. I remember telling my parents about my interest in a fashion design program. They smiled, but there was a certain unease in their eyes. "That's nice, sweetheart," my dad had said. "But have you thought about something more practical, something that could set you up for life?" Of course, they never said it outright, but I could hear it in the unspoken words. Fashion wasn't real work. At least, not in their eyes. It was a hobby, a fleeting dream, and my sister, she had a practical job, a job that made her important. No one would ever question her future. She had everything figured out, and if she didn't have the connections already, she would build them. I, on the other hand, had to beg for scraps. But that didn't stop me. I decided to apply for a design program at a local college, and somehow I got in. It wasn't the best program, but it was a start. I was determined to prove them all wrong, to show my family that I was more than just the screw-up they saw me as. At first, it felt like a dream. I poured myself into my work, spending nights sketching designs, learning about fabric and color theory. I started to build my portfolio, and even though I wasn't getting the recognition I craved, I felt something stirring inside me. I felt alive. But reality had a way of crashing in, of reminding me that I wasn't the golden child. While I was struggling to make ends meet, my sister was flying to Paris for Fashion Week, meeting with the world's top designers, and being lauded in every business magazine. It was like she had the world at her fingertips. And me? I was stuck in a basement apartment with roommates who treated their pets better than they treated each other, eating ramen noodles and scrimping for pennies to pay for supplies. There was one night I'll never forget. It was a few weeks before my final presentation in the program, and I was feeling the pressure. I had spent days perfecting my designs, staying up late, barely sleeping. I needed everything to be perfect. But as I worked, I kept hearing my sister's voice in my head. Her laugh, her confident tone, the way she made everything look so effortless. She made it seem like anyone could be successful, as long as they had the right connections, the right family. And I didn't have any of that. It was late when I called my parents, feeling desperate for a little encouragement. They were always there for me, even if they didn't fully understand my path. "How's school going?" my mom asked. "Are you still thinking about fashion?" I took a deep breath, trying to hide the exhaustion in my voice. Yeah, Mom, I'm working on my final project. It's going well. I didn't tell her how close I was to crashing, how much pressure I was under. That's great. You know, your sister has been making quite a name for herself in the industry. I bet you two could really collaborate one day, if you wanted. She could give you a few pointers. The words stung more than I expected. She had always been the one everyone talked about. My sister, the successful one, the one who could do no wrong. I didn't want to hear about her achievements anymore. I wanted to carve out something for myself, even if it meant working twice as hard for half the recognition. But I was tired, so tired of feeling like I was never good enough. After hanging up, I spent the rest of the night trying to convince myself that I didn't need to measure up to her. But it was hard. It always felt like I was running after her shadow, chasing a dream that seemed impossible. A few months later, after I graduated, I landed an internship at a small fashion startup. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. I moved to a new city, away from my family, and threw myself into the work. My sister, of course, never let me forget what she had done and where she was. Every time we spoke, it felt like she was reminding me of how far ahead she was, but I never told her how much it hurt. Instead, I kept up the front that I was doing just fine, that I was making progress. But the truth was, I was still drowning. The first few months at the startup were rough. I had to work my way up from the very bottom. I did the grunt work, sorting through fabrics, running errands, learning the ropes. But what I wanted more than anything was to prove myself, to show everyone that I wasn't just a backup plan, a second choice. I wasn't just the little sister who was trying to figure things out. I had something to offer. But when the first big opportunity came, an exclusive collaboration with a luxury brand, I watched as my sister swooped in. She was already meeting with the higher-ups, already finalizing deals, already taking credit for the work she didn't even have to do. She wasn't even supposed to be involved in the collaboration, but there she was, sitting in on the meetings like she owned the place. "Do you think it's a good idea?" she asked me one day as I sat at the design table, sketching concepts for the collaboration. "You know, I could probably help you pitch it. Just make sure you have everything aligned before you show it to them." She didn't even try to hide the fact that she was undermining me. She wasn't helping, she was taking over, and I couldn't do anything about it. But something inside me snapped that day. I didn't want her help. I didn't want to be the little sister anymore. I didn't want to feel like I was chasing her success. I was sick of playing by her rules, sick of feeling like I was always in second place. It was time for me to step up and create my own future, no more relying on family, no more hiding. I started building my brand, slowly at first. It wasn't easy. There were nights I couldn't sleep, days when I wondered if it was all worth it. But deep down, I knew I had something unique. I knew I had something worth sharing. I didn't need my sister's approval. I didn't need her validation. I was going to make my own name in this industry. And that's when things started to shift. I began to feel the power of my own vision. I started believing in myself, despite the doubts, despite the years of feeling like I was always second best. As my brand grew, I kept thinking back to that night with my sister, the hoodie, the $70 gift card, the condescending smile. I wanted to say, "Look at me now." But it wasn't just about proving her wrong anymore. It was about proving something to myself. Something I had always known deep down. I was worthy. The morning air was crisp, a subtle reminder that things were changing. I had been in this game for years, building my brand from the ground up, and now I was staring down the moment that would either solidify everything I'd worked for or bring it all crashing down. It was a Thursday, the day of the big presentation. The luxury brand that I had been working with was finally coming to fruition, and I was about to show the world, my world, that I had earned my place at the table. But nothing ever seemed simple with my sister around. She always had a way of making everything complicated, turning every situation into a battle of wills. That morning, I hadn't even had time to breathe before she was on the phone with me, her voice smooth but dripping with thinly veiled superiority. "How's it going?" she asked, like she didn't already know. "You've got your big presentation today, right? Make sure you've got everything in line. It would be a shame if anything went wrong." I gripped the phone tighter, resisting the urge to snap at her. She always had a way of speaking that made it sound like she was helping, when in reality, she was just reminding me how little I mattered in comparison. It wasn't even subtle anymore. "I've got it covered," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm sure you do," she said, her tone turning almost condescending. "But I could always stop by and help if you need me. I've got a few meetings around that area, so I might be in the neighborhood." I could already feel the old familiar tug in my chest, the resentment, the fury, the way she'd always made me feel like I was second-rate, even if she didn't realize it. She was so used to getting everything she wanted, to having the power and the influence that I had spent years fighting for. I didn't need her help, and I didn't need her coming to hover over my presentation. But she had a way of making herself indispensable, like I couldn't function without her. "I don't need your help," I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "I'm fine, I've got it all under control." But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I was terrified. Terrified that I wouldn't live up to the hype, terrified that my best wouldn't be enough. I had spent so many years hiding in the shadows, trying to keep up with her, and now I was finally standing on my own 2 feet, but was it really enough? The call ended, and I sat there, staring at my reflection in the window. My hands were clammy, my heart racing. This was it. The moment where everything I had worked for could either pay off or all the fear, the doubt, the endless sacrifice would come crashing down. I'd put everything into this brand, into this collaboration, and now I had to prove it was worth something. When I arrived at the meeting, I could already feel the tension in the air. The team from the luxury brand had flown in to review the designs to see if they were truly ready to go to market. This wasn't just a presentation, it was the presentation. The one that would determine if my brand had the legs to stand up to the giants in the industry. It was the culmination of years of blood, sweat, and sleepless nights, and I had worked harder than anyone could imagine to get to this point. I couldn't let my sister's shadow loom over me now. As I walked into the sleek, polished conference room, I took a deep breath and pasted on a smile. The executives from the luxury brand were already seated, their faces unreadable. I could tell they were scrutinizing every move I made. This wasn't a space for mistakes, not in front of them. I set up my designs on the large display screen, each one carefully crafted, each one representing my unique vision. This was the moment where I had to let go of the fear, the insecurity, the doubts that had plagued me for so long. This was where I showed them that I wasn't just the little sister anymore. This was where I proved that my ideas, my vision, were worth more than a $70 gift card. I began my pitch, carefully explaining each design, each color choice, and the story behind it. The room was silent, all eyes on me. I could feel the weight of their gazes, their expectation, their judgment. My words started to flow more easily, my confidence building as I spoke. This was what I was meant to do. This was why I had fought so hard for this moment. But just as I was starting to feel like I had them, I saw her, my sister. She walked into the room without a single word, her heels clicking on the polished floor like an announcement. She didn't even have the decency to knock. She just waltzed in like it was her meeting. She smiled at the executives, who immediately greeted her with the kind of respect I'd always wanted. And without missing a beat, she turned to me, her eyes flashing with that all-too-familiar smugness. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It looks like I've arrived just in time. You're doing great, I'm sure, but I thought I'd pop in and offer some of my expertise. I've worked with this brand before, I could give you some pointers." My heart sank. The air in the room felt like it had been sucked out. All of a sudden, I couldn't breathe. My throat tightened as I struggled to keep my composure. How dare she? How dare she just walk in here like she was part of the team, like she was the one who had put in the hours, the effort, the sacrifice? This was my moment, and she was trying to steal it. I took a deep breath, pushing the anger down. I had come too far to let her ruin this for me. "I've got it covered," I said, forcing the words through clenched teeth. She raised an eyebrow but didn't argue, instead turning to the executives with that practiced smile. "Well, I'm sure you know what you're doing," she said, but I could hear the undertones of doubt in her voice. It was like she was making sure that everyone knew who was really in charge. The meeting continued, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my sister was lurking in the background, judging, undermining, just waiting for me to falter. I kept my focus on the task at hand, answering questions, explaining the designs, doing everything I could to keep the momentum going. But inside, I was falling apart. It wasn't just the presence of my sister that unsettled me, it was the realization that she was everywhere. She was always there, always a step ahead, always pulling the strings. And as much as I hated to admit it, a part of me still wanted her approval, still wanted her to look at me and see that I wasn't the screw-up she'd always thought I was. But that day, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about me. It was about proving to myself that I could do this, that I could build something that was worth something. I wasn't her shadow. I wasn't just some project she could fix with a $70 gift card. I was my own person, and I was done living in her wake. The meeting ended without any major catastrophes, but it wasn't a victory either. The executives were polite, even complimentary, but I could tell they were holding something back. It wasn't the resounding success I had hoped for. But as I walked out of that room, a strange sense of determination washed over me. I wasn't going to let her win this time. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much. I wasn't going to let my sister's shadow cloud my vision anymore. But just as I thought I was done, as I stepped out into the bright daylight, I heard her voice behind me. "You're doing fine," she said, her tone too sweet to be sincere. "Just remember, you're not going to get very far without the right connections." I turned around slowly, my fists clenched. "You're wrong," I said, my voice low but steady. "I don't need your connections, I don't need you. I'll make it on my own." She didn't respond, just gave me that infuriating, knowing smile. But as I walked away, I realized something. She could try to tear me down, she could try to undermine me, but I wasn't going anywhere. The path ahead was mine to walk, and no one, no matter how successful, no matter how smug, could take that away from me. Not anymore. The next few days blurred into each other in a haze of sleepless nights and restless thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That meeting, the tension with my sister, it all felt like a step in the wrong direction. The luxury brand executives had been polite, but they hadn't seemed sold on my designs. They hadn't looked at me the way I wanted them to, like I was the one with the answers. Instead, I felt like I was still fighting for their approval, still fighting to prove that I was worthy of even being in the room. And what stung the most was that my sister, as always, was right there, hovering in the background, making me feel small without even trying. I kept telling myself that it didn't matter, that I was doing this for me, that I didn't need her validation. But the truth was, it did matter. It mattered more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't just about building a brand anymore. It was about reclaiming a piece of myself, proving to the world, and to her, that I wasn't just a bystander in my own life. The night after the meeting, I got a text from my sister. She didn't even try to mask the condescension. "Good job today. I'm sure you're doing your best, but remember, it's not always about the designs. It's about the story you tell. Make sure you're selling the vision, not just the product." I read it over and over, each word cutting deeper. It wasn't advice, it was a reminder. A reminder that she had already done what I was trying to do, that she had the success, the story, the brand. She had already won, and everything I did was just a footnote to her narrative. The next morning, I sat in front of my laptop, the glaring white screen mocking me. I had been up all night, going over the presentation in my mind, replaying every little detail. The designs, the pitch, my sister's infuriating smile. I felt like I was stuck in a loop, unable to break free of the past. Every step forward felt like 2 steps back. The doubt was eating away at me, and no matter how many times I told myself I had the talent, the vision, the drive, it never felt enough. And then, just as I was about to close the laptop and drown in my frustration, my phone buzzed. I picked it up absently, not expecting anything of importance, but when I saw the name on the screen, my heart skipped a beat. It was the CEO of the luxury brand, the one I had been working with, the one I thought hadn't been impressed. "I'd like to see you tomorrow morning. Can you make it?" I stared at the message, unsure whether to feel elated or terrified. Was this it? Had I finally gotten through to them, or was this just another meeting to let me down? My thoughts were racing, but something deep inside me knew that this could be the moment that changed everything. I didn't waste any time. I responded quickly, confirming the meeting. And in that moment, a new sense of determination took over. Maybe my sister had her story, her brand, her success, but this was my chance to write my own. I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me, not even her. The next morning, I arrived at the luxury brand's headquarters early, my mind racing with possibilities. The building itself was a reflection of everything I wanted, modern, sleek, intimidating. As I stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of leather and fresh paint. the kind of smell that made you feel like you were entering an exclusive world. The receptionist greeted me politely, and I was led into a sleek, minimalist conference room. I could feel the weight of the space, the expectation in the air. A few moments later, the CEO walked in. Tall, confident, sharp-dressed, everything I had imagined. She smiled at me, but there was something in her eyes that made me nervous. She wasn't here to coddle me, I could tell that much. This was business. Pure, unfiltered business. "Thank you for coming in," she said, her voice smooth but firm. "I've been reviewing your designs and I have some questions. Let's dive right in." I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. This was it. The moment I had been preparing for. I had to get this right. As the meeting went on, I could feel the CEO's eyes on me, studying me, evaluating me. I kept my composure, answering each question with confidence, elaborating on the stories behind my designs, talking about my vision for the brand. It was clear that she wasn't just looking for another designer. She was looking for someone who understood the essence of luxury, someone who could elevate her brand to new heights. But just as I was starting to feel like I was holding my own, the CEO threw me a curveball. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled together, and asked the question that had been lurking in the back of my mind for years. "What makes your brand different from all the others out there? Why should we partner with you when your sister's already been established for so long?" The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. For a split second, I felt like I had been blindsided, like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My sister. Of course. She had already made a name for herself, built her empire, and now I was being measured against her. I wanted to snap back, to tell her that I wasn't my sister, that I wasn't here because of connections or family ties. I wanted to scream that I had built this from nothing, that every piece of this brand was a reflection of my own struggle, my own journey. But I couldn't. Instead, I took a deep breath and forced myself to answer. "Because I'm not just creating luxury fashion," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside. "I'm creating a story, a vision. I'm building something that connects with people on a deeper level, something that resonates. It's not just about the designs, it's about the experience. The luxury isn't in the fabric, it's in the emotion, the feeling that each piece evokes." The CEO's expression softened ever so slightly. "Interesting," she said, nodding slowly. "You're building a brand, not just a collection. I like that." The next hour was a blur of questions, back-and-forth discussions, and explanations of my vision. I left the meeting feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. I had made my case. I had answered her questions with confidence, held my ground, and shown that I had something valuable to offer. But as I stepped into the elevator, the reality of it all began to sink in. This wasn't over. The meeting was just one step, and there was still so much that could go wrong. When I returned home later that evening, I couldn't help but think about my sister. She had been right there in the background of everything, lingering like a ghost, her influence casting a long shadow over every decision I made. But something had shifted inside me during that meeting. I had found my voice, I had found my power, and no matter what happened next, I was done being defined by her. The luxury brand executives hadn't just seen the designs, they had seen me. For the first time, I felt like I was no longer fighting to keep up. I was standing on my own. And as the days passed, I waited for the call that would tell me if everything had paid off, if my vision had been enough to secure the partnership. But I already knew one thing for certain. This was my moment. And I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me, not even my sister. The phone call came later that week, and with it, a rush of emotions I couldn't quite contain. When the number flashed on my screen, I knew it had to be the call. My heart pounded in my chest as I picked up, doing my best to keep the tremble out of my voice. "Hello," I said, trying to sound casual, even though I was anything but. "Hi, it's Nina from the luxury brand," came the voice on the other end. "We've reviewed everything, and we're ready to move forward. We'd like to offer you a contract to collaborate on our upcoming collection." The words hit me like a wave crashing over my head, knocking the breath from my lungs. For a second, I just stood there, silent, unable to process what had just been said. This wasn't some small milestone. This was it. This was everything I had been working toward for years. It wasn't just a brand partnership, it was validation. It was recognition. It was my ticket to the next level. "Are you there?" Nina asked, her voice gentle but with a hint of concern. Yeah, I'm here, I stammered, shaking my head as if trying to wake myself up from some kind of dream. I'm just shocked. This is incredible, thank you, I thank you. Of course, Nina replied. We'll send over the details. We're excited to have you on board. I hung up, my hands still trembling as I stared at the phone in my hand, the reality slowly sinking in. I had done it. I had actually done it. For years, I had been working to get to this point, constantly doubting myself, constantly wondering if I was good enough. But now I was finally getting what I deserved. My brand was no longer just an idea. It was real. It was happening. But even as the euphoria washed over me, another, darker thought began to creep in. My sister. She had no idea what I had just accomplished. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I didn't want her to know. Not yet. I didn't want to tell her. Not because I was afraid of her reaction, but because I knew exactly what she would say. She would act like it was no big deal, like she had known all along that I could do it. She would act like it wasn't something worth celebrating. And that was what hurt. The next few days passed in a blur. I went over the contract with my lawyer, making sure every detail was in place. I spoke with the team from the luxury brand, hashing out the final details of the collaboration. Everything was falling into place, exactly as I had dreamed. But despite the whirlwind of excitement, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My sister had been quiet. She hadn't called, hadn't checked in. I was almost surprised by the silence. For a brief moment, I wondered if she already knew, if somehow the news had reached her and she was just waiting for the right moment to confront me. But then again, I had always kept my business separate from her. I never let her in on my plans. She was the one who had always overshadowed me, and I had learned to keep my distance, to protect what little I had built for myself. It wasn't until I received a text from her that I realized how badly I had miscalculated. I heard about your little collaboration with that brand. Congrats, I guess. I felt a sharp sting at the words, but I didn't let it show. She had been smug before, but this felt different. It was dismissive. It was like she was acknowledging my success only because she had to, like it wasn't even worth her full attention. I let the text sit there for a moment, stewing in my anger. It wasn't the congratulations I was looking for. It wasn't even genuine. It was her way of showing me that, even now, she was in control. Even though I had just secured the biggest deal of my life, she was still trying to make me feel small. I took a deep breath and replied, "Thanks, I guess you've been busy with your own stuff, huh?" There was a long pause before she responded. My phone buzzed with the incoming text, and I almost didn't want to look. But I did. "You think you're special, don't you? Just because you got some fancy contract. You're not the first designer to work with a big brand, but it's cute that you think this is your big break." The words hit me like a slap to the face. My stomach churned, my blood boiled. For the first time in my life, I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my phone against the wall and yell at her until she understood how much she had hurt me. But instead, I just sat there, staring at the screen. It wasn't just the text that stung. It was everything behind it, the years of being told I wasn't enough, the constant need to prove myself, to fight for my place at the table. She had never seen me as anything more than the little sister, the one who wasn't as good as her. And it seemed like that would never change. No matter what I accomplished, no matter how far I got, I would always be fighting against her. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing that I had spent so much of my life trying to get her approval, trying to prove to her that I was worthy. I had spent so much time chasing her, trying to make her see me, that I had almost forgotten why I started this in the first place. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. The next few days were a blur of meetings and phone calls, the excitement of my success mingling with the sting of my sister's words. But deep down, I knew I was making progress. I wasn't doing this for her. I wasn't doing this for anyone except myself. And then, everything came crashing down in an instant. It happened on a rainy afternoon, the kind of dreary day that made everything feel heavier, like the weight of the world was pressing down on your shoulders. I was in the middle of a phone call with my team, going over some final details for the launch when I heard a knock on my door. I excused myself, thinking it was just the mailman or one of the staff members from the building, but when I opened it, I froze. Standing in front of me was my sister. She didn't wait for me to invite her in. She just stepped across the threshold, her eyes sharp, her posture rigid. She was dressed in the same confident, polished way she always had been, her presence radiating authority. "What are you doing here?" I asked, the words coming out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let her walk in like she owned the place. "You think you can just walk into this world and take what's mine?" she asked, her voice cold, calculated. "You think this is your big moment, but you're just playing at it. You'll never be the real thing, not like me." I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. My sister, the one person who had always been there, who had always been the example, was standing in front of me, telling me that I would never be good enough. My hands trembled, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm not trying to be you," I said. "I'm trying to be me. I'm done living in your shadow." Her expression shifted, just for a moment, just enough for me to see the vulnerability she kept hidden behind her carefully constructed walls. But it was gone almost as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that familiar, smug smile. "You'll never be able to do it without me," she said. "You're too weak, you'll see, you always do." And with that, she turned and walked out, leaving me standing there, shaking, the weight of her words crushing me in a way I didn't expect. For a long time, I didn't move. I just stood there, trying to piece together the wreckage of what had just happened. But then something inside me clicked. I wasn't going to let her win, not this time, not anymore. The call from the luxury brand had been the first step. This was the second. I had done this on my own, and I was going to finish it on my own, too. I was done letting my sister define me. The days that followed that confrontation with my sister felt like an emotional roller coaster. I had spent so much of my life hopping for her approval, waiting for the day she would see me as an equal, as someone who could stand on her own 2 feet. But now it was clear. That day would never come. She would never see me for who I was, for what I had accomplished, and she would always hold herself above me, no matter how far I went, no matter how high I climbed. But for the first time, I realized I didn't need her to see me. I didn't need her to recognize my worth. I had spent too many years chasing her shadow, trying to catch up to something I would never be able to attain. The truth was, I didn't want to be her. I didn't want to follow her path, live in her world, and play by her rules. I had built my own world, and it was time for me to step into it fully. The call from the luxury brand had been a turning point, but what happened after that was the real test. It wasn't just about getting the contract, it was about what came next. This collaboration wasn't just a job or an opportunity. It was my chance to finally carve my own space in this industry, to build something that was entirely mine. No one could take that away from me, not even her. But there was one thing I hadn't anticipated: the guilt. It crept in slowly, quietly, like a shadow in the back of my mind, whispering at first, then growing louder and more insistent with each passing day. My family had always been there for me, or at least I thought they had. They had supported my sister's success, celebrated her at every turn, and never once seemed to notice how hard I had worked to get here, how much I had sacrificed. And now, I was about to step into a world where I would finally be recognized, finally be seen for my talent and my vision, and I couldn't help but wonder, was this worth the cost? I called my parents that evening, something I hadn't done in a while. Our relationship had been strained for years, especially after I chose to leave their expectations behind and pursue my own path. But still, there was a part of me that wanted their approval, even if I knew it might never come. "Hey, Mom, Dad," I said, my voice tight with a mix of nervousness and resolve. "I wanted to tell you something." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by my mom's warm, familiar voice. "What is it, sweetheart? You sound serious." "I just signed a deal with a luxury brand," I said, trying to keep my tone steady, though I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. "It's a big step for me." There was silence for a moment. I could feel the weight of their reaction before they even spoke. Finally, my mom cleared her throat. "Wow, that's really something," she said slowly. "I didn't know you were working with them." "I've been working on this for a while," I replied, trying to keep the frustration from creeping into my voice. "It's been a long journey, but it's finally happening." "I see," my dad said, his voice flat. "And your sister, is she involved in this project?" I winced. Of course, he would ask that. I had been so careful to keep my sister out of this, so determined to not let her overshadow my hard work, my success. But there it was, the comparison that had been there my whole life, the unspoken truth that no matter what I did, I would always be measured against her. "She's not involved," I said, biting my lip to keep my voice from shaking. "This is my project, my brand." "Well, I hope you know what you're doing," my dad said, his tone still distant. "This is a big leap. It's not easy to get in with those kinds of brands." I could hear my mom in the background, trying to change the subject, trying to bring some warmth to the conversation. But it was clear, clearer than it had ever been before, that I would never get the validation I was seeking from them. I wasn't my sister. I didn't have the same connections, the same reputation, the same pedigree. And I had spent my whole life chasing something that was never going to be mine. After I hung up, I felt the weight of their indifference settle over me like a blanket. The one thing I had wanted, to prove myself to them, wasn't going to happen. They would always compare me to her. I would always be the one who had to work harder, fight harder, just to be seen. But that wasn't their fault. It was mine. I had allowed myself to be defined by their expectations for too long. I had let my sister's success, my parents' love for her, shape how I saw myself. But not anymore. I was done. The next day, I got a call from the luxury brand. The deal was official. The contract was signed. The partnership was in motion. It was happening. I couldn't believe it, but there it was. I was no longer just the girl trying to make it in the fashion industry. I had done it. And that was when everything changed. As I sat down to celebrate, I started to reflect on everything that had led me to this moment. I thought about my sister, about the years of trying to prove myself to her. I thought about the sacrifices I had made, the long hours, the rejections, the failures. I thought about all the moments when I had felt invisible, like I was walking through life unnoticed, like no one cared about what I was doing. I thought about how much I had wanted her to see me, to acknowledge my worth. But now I understood. I didn't need her to see me. I didn't need anyone to see me. I had built this brand for myself. It was my creation, my vision, and no one could take that away from me. The next step was mine to take. It wasn't going to be easy. There would always be hurdles, always be people who doubted me, always be those who thought I was too small, too inexperienced, too unimportant. But I had built this from the ground up, with nothing but my ideas and my drive. I had made it this far, and I wasn't going to let anyone, especially my sister, tell me I wasn't enough. The guilt started to fade. The weight of my parents' indifference started to feel lighter. I didn't need their approval to be successful. I didn't need their validation to be proud of what I had accomplished. I had learned that the only person whose approval mattered was mine. But even as I started to embrace my success, there was a lingering question in the back of my mind. What would my sister do when she found out? Would she try to undermine me again? Would she dismiss my achievement as a fluke? Or would she finally recognize that I had built something real, something worth fighting for? I didn't know the answer to that, but what I did know was that I didn't need her approval anymore. As I prepared for the next phase of my brand's journey, I realized that the hardest part wasn't the work or the hustle. It was learning to accept that I had always been enough. I had always had the talent, the vision, and the drive. What I lacked wasn't skill, it was belief. And now, for the first time, I believed in myself. This wasn't just the beginning of a brand, it was the beginning of my life. And I was finally ready to live it, on my own terms. It felt surreal, stepping into the reality I had fought for. The world I had dreamed of was now tangible, within my reach, but it wasn't without its scars. I had spent years chasing the approval of others, namely my sister, my parents, and a society that seemed to only value what was externally impressive. I had run myself ragged, building a brand that now commanded attention, but as I stood in my office, looking out over the city skyline, I realized that the success I had always imagined felt different. It was quieter, less fulfilling than I had anticipated. I had achieved what I set out to do, create something entirely my own, a luxury brand that was poised to become a serious player in the industry. But the taste of victory was bittersweet. It wasn't just the weight of the pressure, or the long hours, or the setbacks I had endured to get here. It was the realization that no amount of success could fill the void left by years of emotional neglect. And as much as I had hoped that building my empire would erase the years spent in my sister's shadow, it hadn't. It was still there, a ghost that haunted me every time I looked at my reflection. I had to face it. The battle I had fought wasn't just for a luxury brand or for financial independence. It was for validation. Validation from a family who had never seen me for who I was. From a sister who had always overshadowed me, belittling my dreams, making me feel insignificant. No matter how far I went, no matter how successful I became, the ghost of my past still lingered. And despite everything, I found myself yearning for something that could never be given to me: acknowledgement. But that was something I had to stop waiting for. A lesson I had learned, and one that had taken far too long for me to understand. Validation had to come from within. I didn't need my sister's approval. I didn't need my parents to see me as a success. I didn't need anyone to recognize my worth except me. I had always been enough. As the days passed and the brand's success continued to grow, I started to understand the power of this truth. I no longer felt the urge to compare myself to my sister, to measure my success against hers. I wasn't trying to outdo her anymore. I was just trying to live my own life. It wasn't about her. It never had been. It was about me, about finally becoming the person I had always known I could be. But the hardest part was understanding how much I had changed. I had spent so long being angry, so long holding onto resentment and bitterness. I had allowed the past to define me, to shape my identity, but no more. The shift wasn't just in my career, it was in the way I saw myself, in the way I related to the world around me. I had spent so many years worrying about what others thought, trying to prove myself to them. But now, I realized that the only opinion that mattered was mine. That didn't mean that the past didn't hurt. It did. And as I began to process everything that had led me to this point, I knew there were still wounds that needed healing. I had been so focused on proving my worth that I had never taken the time to process the emotional toll it had taken on me. I decided to go to therapy. It was something I had resisted for a long time. After all, I was successful. I had achieved what so many people could only dream of. I was a CEO, a business owner, someone whose name was now synonymous with luxury fashion. I didn't need therapy, or at least, that's what I told myself. But deep down, I knew that the success I had built could only mask the pain for so long. In the beginning, therapy felt uncomfortable. It felt like I was admitting weakness, like I was giving in to everything I had spent so long trying to avoid. But as the sessions progressed, I started to realize something important. Therapy wasn't about weakness. It was about strength, the strength to confront the past and to heal from it. It was about facing the parts of myself I had ignored for years, the parts of me that had been overshadowed by my need to prove myself. I started talking about my family, about the years spent in my sister's shadow. I talked about the pain of constantly being compared to her, of feeling like I wasn't good enough, of always being the one who had to try harder just to be seen. I talked about the jealousy, the resentment, the sense of worthlessness that had followed me for so long. And slowly, as I let myself feel those things, I started to release them. I stopped carrying them around like a badge of honor. I stopped letting them define me. I learned to forgive, not my sister, not my parents, but myself. I forgave myself for the years I had spent trying to earn something that was never truly mine. I forgave myself for the anger I had harbored, for the bitterness that had consumed me. I forgave myself for thinking that I had to be someone I wasn't in order to be worthy. It wasn't an easy process, but it was necessary. And in doing so, I found peace. The void that had been inside me for so long began to fill with something new: acceptance. I accepted that I wasn't perfect. I accepted that I couldn't change the past, but I could change the way I saw it. I accepted that my journey was my own, and that the success I had achieved wasn't just the product of hard work. It was the product of resilience, of learning to trust myself, and of learning to let go of the need to prove something to anyone else. It wasn't just therapy that helped me see things differently. It was the reflection that came with success. As my brand continued to grow, as the partnerships and collaborations flowed in, I began to realize that the real victory wasn't the financial success or the brand recognition. It wasn't the validation I had been seeking for so long. It was the fact that I had built something meaningful from nothing. I had taken my own passion, my own vision, and created something that had the power to make a difference. And in doing so, I had finally found my purpose, not in the eyes of others, but in my own. I wasn't the same person I had been when I started this journey. I wasn't the insecure girl who constantly measured herself against her sister. I wasn't the one who was constantly fighting for a place at the table. I had my own seat now. I had earned it, and it was mine to keep. But even as I embraced this new sense of peace, I couldn't help but think about my sister. I knew that our relationship would never be the same. The divide between us had only grown wider over the years. She had her empire, her success, and I had mine. But it wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about who we were as individuals, who we had become in the face of everything we had been through. And though I couldn't change the past, I knew that I had changed. I had found my own path. And that was enough. As the weeks passed, I began to rebuild my life, not just as a business owner, but as someone who had learned to let go of the past and step into the future. My relationship with my family was still strained, but it was better. I had found a way to reconcile with myself, to accept that I didn't need their approval anymore. And that was the greatest gift I could give myself. I had spent so long trying to build something that would make others see me, that would make them acknowledge my worth. But now, I realized that the only person whose approval I needed was me. I was enough. And in the end, that was all that mattered.